The Captain's Log Radio with your host, Captain Jonathan Moss.
Hey, welcome to the Captain's Log Radio. This is our Tackle Box Tip segment presented by Icon Coolers. I'm Captain Jonathan Moss, and with me I have Captain Tony Summers. We are quickly approaching spring. This is late winter, early spring. We're getting there. Last week it was sweat. It was hot. I was sweating. This week it's cold. We've got all kinds of crazy weather going on, and this is the time of year where we like to transition out on the bass side to punching, to throwing heavy jigs in the vegetation. Tony, what do you got for me, man? Tell me a tip for today.
Just as you said, when these fish are up shallow like this, the weather moves in, it's cold, they need cover to feel protected, but also to get warmth, and they do that in the mats. So we use heavier setups to kind of get into these little clusters of vegetation and get into these areas where these fish are out in the cover. And so we use heavy setups. We use typically, it's pretty standard, it's about 7.5, but all the way up to 8 foot. Heavy or extra heavy casting rods with a bait caster, something heavier duty, 50 to even 80-pound braid. Standard is probably 50 on that. The braid is tied straight to the hook. Probably a classic weight setup is about 1.5 ounces, but you let the cover dictate the weight typically, or the activity of the fish also can dictate the weight. And the weight can dictate the rate of fall after you go through the cover. How heavy it is, determines how fast it's going to come through. So you can kind of adjust that too. If they're not hitting it on the fall right away, maybe you need to slow it down a little bit. You can go a little bit lighter. But typically I go with a weight that's just heavy enough to kind of punch through typically. I don't want something overly heavy or overly light where I'm having to like force it, or, I just can't get it through. But most mats, typically throw 1.5 ounces. And then the hook setup on that is determined by the size of the bait that you're throwing. And that's probably around a 3-inch, maybe 4-inch bait. So I'm throwing a 3/0 or a 4/0 hook, and I match the size, the odd of the hook, I match to the inch of the bait. So 3-inch bait, 3/0 hook, 4-inch bait, and you can kind of play off of that too. But typically that's what you want to reference is is that odd of the hook to the inch of the bait. As weird as that sounds. And then my line tie is either a double uni, which is direct on the eye, or a snell. And the way I explain this, I don't know if I can do it on the camera or not, is I do a snell if I'm close quarter, right next to the boat. And what it does is the line tie kicks the hook up. The weight comes down, hits the hook, and it kicks the hook up. But if you get too far away and you're pitching like real far to a mat, well, now what happens is the hook point actually turns down because it's kicked up. So with that snell hook, the fish's mouth is actually not getting hooked like it would if you were closer to the boat and it coming up into the roof of the mouth. So that's when I do a line tie. And the flipping hooks we're using are a straight shank or a J shape, right? So with that straight line tie, it's going to come more into the fish's roof of the mouth if you're farther away. So I do, sometimes if I'm just on a straight flipping bite, I'll have both tied on. Even same weight. I'll have one tied to the snell and one tied. That way, if I've got a mat, if I'm fishing along the bank, I got a mat real far, I'll grab the other rod and throw it over. But then now sometimes also the snell can be a poor hookup ratio depending on your hook set. Hook set can either increase or decrease your hookup ratio with the snell hook. So going straight to the eye might be an overall better knot to tie for a punching setup because you don't deal with that situation with the snell. But for guys that are a little more experienced in the specialized hook set, as crazy as that sounds, the snell can be good as well.
That's very, very interesting, and that's something that you only figure out by trying and seeing that lure.
Certainly.
Turn. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
For guys who don't throw a bait caster, is this something they can do on a spinning rod?
No, it's very difficult. If the cover's not super thick and you can get like a half to 3/4 in fairly, heavy cover, then you can do it with a spinning rod, like a 7, maybe 7.3 heavy, 4 to 5,000 reel, 50-pound braid, same braid.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can certainly get the job done. But if you're not used to a bait caster and you can learn it, it's the best setup for sure. It's the most accurate. Well, a lot of times it's actually required to be very accurate while punching, because there's very specific spots. Once you learn where they're at, there's very specific spots where you want to punch at in the mat. Sometimes there's not. There's just a huge mat. There's 20, 30 feet of a mat and you're just randomly punching, and it's, you just find them just covered in water. But sometimes it can require you to be kind of accurate with it. And I will say too, like this time of year with the cold front, we will downsize the bait as the conditions decrease, as far as like the cold front come in, water temperature drop, go smaller with it. They're gonna be more susceptible to eating the smaller bait in cold front situation, or just poor conditions. But water warms up, don't be afraid to go into a 4 or 5 inch crawl with some action to it and kind of get their attention as it's coming through the mat.
That's
yeah.
Great.
Well, one thing I'll say too, also with the hook set, when it goes through, just my preference, guys might argue with me on this, is I'm not one to just like bow to the fish and rear back and set the thing as hard as I can. I'm more one to feel the bite, and I'm going to load up on the fish, and I'm going to use a lot of the rod and the reel together rather than just trying to rip his lips out. I feel like it's a better hookup ratio. Still coming, fairly hard hook set, but it's not just snapping into the line on the hook set with that.
I like punching fish. I like hitting them.
It's fun.
I've been that way since I was a kid. I don't know. My dad told me this, and I tell it to my clients. These fish are talking bad about your mama, so you punch them in the face.
Get mad at them.
Get mad at them. Hit them hard. But
get mad at them.
If you are finding, and this has happened to me, I've had to tell myself, "Hey, chill out," because I get really excited about setting the hook, and then I'll pull it away. So you really got to focus. You really got to pay attention, or if you don't, you're going to have the wrong reaction. And like you said, you're going to miss on that fish.
And I think part of the reason to that too is from watching clients do it is when you're like, you got your rod out there, right, and you drop the rod real fast, you create slack, and you set into slack. I think that's what does it, because the weight now comes up into and smacks their lips and opens the mouth. But if you can set hard, but you've got to have tension on it at the start of that hook set. The weight's got to be up against their mouth already. Then you can rip into them. But if you drop the rod real low, create slack, and then come up into them hard, it's too much force.
And I know this is kind of off topic, but it's kind of the same. It's the same when we're fly fishing. And I tell clients all the time who are stripping in their fly and the rod is too high off the water, I point that rod to the water, touch the water with the rod tip. Because when you go to strip set, when you go to come tight, if you have your rod further up, there's more slack. There's more has to be pulled to come tight before you come tight to the fish. And now that hook set is not as nearly as strong or as powerful to drive that hook through that fish's mouth. You think about a big snook like the one behind me from New Wave Taxidermy, or you think about a big tarpon. If you don't have enough tension on that rod when you set the hook, you're not going to drive it through that hard mouth, that bony, tough, solid mouth. So coming tight and being tight when you set the hook can make all the difference. That's fly, spin, casting. You got to be tight. If there's slack there, you're going to lose. You're going to have to move the rod so much further to get that slack out, to get tight, to really punch through. But dude, good stuff. Really, really good stuff. Hey, this is the Captain's Log Radio. This is our Tackle Box Tip segment presented by Icon Coolers. I got Captain Tony Summers. That was incredible intel for you bass anglers out there who are wanting to punch mats this time of year as we're transitioning into spring. It's cold. These fish are moving into the structure. Get in there and punch those mats and see what you can come up with. Those are some good fish are typically hiding under that vegetation to stay warm.
Oh yeah.
Captain's Log Radio. Thanks for being here. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to the Captain's Log Radio with your host, Captain Jonathan Moss.